Welcome back. In the previous lecture, we looked at some of the most crucial elements of effective writing. These included some themes that we're going to return to repeatedly in this course, and they begin with, first of all, understanding and respecting your audience. Other things that you need to pay attention to include identifying what information you need to convey to different readers, how you want to convey it, and finally, shaping the response of those readers to your work so that you can better achieve your writing goals. Last time, we studied the strategies that some successful fiction writers used to secure particular kinds of responses from readers. And in the exercises at the end of the lecture, you had the opportunity to hone your own ability to both identify and write for different audiences. More specifically, in the exercises for last time, I asked you to convey the news of your beloved Uncle Wilfred's death to 4 different audiences for 4 different purposes. First, I wanted you to try and write about your uncle as an obituary for the local newspaper. Second, I wanted you to try and tell about his death in a letter to a good friend of yours who had met your uncle a few times. Third, I wanted you to convey this news to a scholarship committee that you wanted to convince to create a scholarship in your uncle's memory. And finally, I asked you to try and imagine how you would write about this if you were getting in touch with an old Navy buddy of your uncle's and this Navy buddy had not yet been told of his death. Now, you may not have fully recognized it as you were completing these exercises, but each one required you to create a balance of description and explanation. Description of the facts related to your uncle's death and explanation of that death's meaning. And obviously, of course, both the descriptive and explanatory qualities of each of these 4 pieces of writing differed depending on the audience and the purpose. And this means how you understood and approached your readers and what responses you wanted to secure from them are going to differ based on your understanding of the situation. For example, your Uncle Wilfred's old Navy buddy certainly would have liked to hear about how much you love to listen to your uncle tell the story of the time they both had too much to drink and got tattoos. But you can probably also imagine that when you were contacting the scholarship committee, this story was not high on the list of information you wanted them to know about your uncle. You'd be much more inclined in a case like this to mention your uncle's wartime bravery rather than his antics between combat episodes. So in this lecture and the 3 that follow it, we'll look more closely at methods for securing the kind of responses you want for your argument. We're going to do this by shifting our focus to the ways successful arguments are constructed. We're going to talk about how to open an argument as well as how to organize, support, and conclude it. We're going to start by evaluating and critiquing the openings of 2 of the most famous argumentative essays in the English and American literary traditions. These are Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, which we've already spent a little time with, and Henry David Thoreau's classic Resistance to Civil Government. And this is a text that you probably know by its more common title of Civil Disobedience. So, just as a reminder, here's the first sentence from Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, in which Swift sets up the satirical argument that the Irish should adopt a policy of essentially eating their own children as a solution to the problems of widespread poverty and hunger. He says, "It is a melancholy object to those who walk through this great town or travel in the country when they see the streets, the roads, and cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3, 4, or 6 children, all in rags, and importuning every passenger for an alms." Okay, so obviously we haven't gotten to the satirical part yet. There's absolutely nothing humorous about the picture Swift is painting here. But what we do see in these opening lines is a very successful blend of description and explanation that will subsequently serve as the foundation for his entire argument. In other words, this opening paragraph is really a model of how to combine explanation and description. Because you know from this single sentence what the problem is, Swift is describing mothers and children begging in the streets of Dublin. And also, you know why it's a topic worth making an argument about. He explains quite explicitly, every person's affected, whether you're a beggar or someone to be begged from. And moreover, this situation holds true, he says, whether you're in the city or the country. So it's a universal problem. It's everyone's concern. So right away, Swift has our attention and probably our sympathy. This seems like an issue to which we should be paying attention, obviously. Swift then proceeds to add both specificity and substance to this opening. And he says, quote, "Whoever could find out a fair, cheap, and easy method of making these children sound, useful members of the Commonwealth would deserve so well of the public as to have his statue set up for a preserver of the nation." Okay, so here, Swift has done a great job of articulating what's at stake here. It's nothing less than the future of the Commonwealth. Oh my goodness. So definitely we need to pay attention. We also get a reference to just how substantial the reward would be for anyone who could offer a solution to the problem. And seriously, who wouldn't want their own statue as the savior of the nation? I mean, I know I would enjoy having a statue. But now we've understood the problem, and we've been given some idea of how grateful the whole British Empire would be to the person who found a solution. So you can imagine that in the minds of the readers, ideas for possibilities for becoming this savior are starting to churn. But as we'll see in a moment, and as many of you already know, Swift's tongue is planted more or less firmly in his cheek at this point. Nonetheless, even though this is satire, he's clearly demonstrated an effective strategy for opening an argument. He describes the subject or the topic at hand, he gives an explanation of its importance, and then he rounds it out with specificity and substance. I often refer to this strategy as taking what I call an expository approach to an argument. And this means that your introduction is striking a productive balance between telling me what you're writing about and showing me why it matters. So you can remember those two words, telling and showing. I often tell my students that as they write, they should be thinking about the so what question. In other words, after you've done a beautiful job, say, imagining why or explaining why the character of Mr. Bennet in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice is really a cruel man and not a sympathetic figure, I might ask you, okay, so what? Why is that important? Why should we care? If you are always trying to keep that so what question in mind as you write, your work is going to end up being all the stronger for it. But going back to Swift for a moment, I also want you to notice that Swift does not lard his opening or stuff it with melodramatic, universal claims or really unnecessary generalities. In other words, he's not wasting time trying to make a subject seem important by giving us vague, empty statements. And we've all probably read these or written these in some time in the past. We've come across statements like this or produced them ourselves. Statements like, poverty has plagued human society since the days of cavemen, or hunger is a serious problem that needs to be solved. Okay, yes, true, this is correct, but these kinds of universal or general claims, while they have an element of truth to them, don't do anything to establish the importance of this particular argument about this particular instance of poverty and hunger. By firmly fixing his argument in a specific time and a specific place, and then making a substantial claim about what's at stake, why it matters, the so what question, Swift gives his audience a compelling reason to keep reading. I also want to take a moment to point out the degree and the type of details Swift includes in his opening. We get some indication of how bad the situation is, because obviously, the children are dressed in rags. But Swift shows some restraint. He holds off on giving us a full-scale account of the horrors. He recognizes that an effective opening requires a few details, but these have to be chosen really, really carefully. They've got to add substance to the introduction, but not so much that they become the main focus of the reader's attention. For example, if Swift had gone on and on about the lice in the children's hair, or the open sores on their shins, or he'd added any other number of really dramatic details, it might have been too much and caused the reader to stop reading. It's like those ads on TV that show you images of abused animals in order to try and get you to support a charity that helps pets who have been mistreated. I am an animal lover, and in theory, I fully support charitable work designed to alleviate the suffering of abused animals. However, I do not actually know the name of the charity that produced these ads because I personally find them so distressing that I change the channel whenever the ads come on. So essentially, what Swift is doing here is he's calling our attention to the problem, but he doesn't give us so much information that we want to change the channel. He's given us just enough to make us care, and as we'll see, he's given us just enough to set us up for the joke that he's about to play on us without making us angry that we've invested too much of our sympathy or too much of our interest in this cause. Here's what he says a few lines later, and you may remember this from earlier in this lecture series. Quote, "I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young, healthy child, well nursed, is at a year old a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled, and I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or a ragout." Okay, so what then is the modest proposal of Swift's title? As we've already discussed, it is to have the Irish eat their own children. Now, obviously, this is a satirical essay, and he is not really suggesting this. What he is doing is commenting on the other offensive proposals that have been put forth to deal with what was a really desperate situation of the Irish people at this time. But even though it's satire, Swift's essay is a model of really effective, good, compelling argumentation. And so we can learn a lot from it by examining it more closely. All right, so let's see if we can use Swift's strategy to make our own openings more effective. In other words, let's see if we can craft an introduction to an argument that balances a specific description of a topic with a substantial explanation of its significance. And let's see if we can do it without falling back on universal claims and generalizations or unnecessary and distracting details. So let's take this for an example. Imagine you've submitted a request to your health insurance provider for coverage of a particular medical procedure. And let's imagine that the health insurance company has come back and said, "We're going to deny this claim, it's medically unnecessary." And now you're in the position where you need to craft an appeal letter to your insurer that offers a compelling argument in support of your case. Now, just take a moment and don't try to compose the entire letter. Just think in your head maybe what the first few sentences might say or what the major points are that you'd want to convey as quickly as possible in this letter. And your goal here again should be to balance a description of your situation with an explanation of its importance. And we've all been in a situation similar to this, I imagine, and had to craft a kind of appeal letter. And it can be really difficult to separate sort of your own emotions and what you think is important in a letter like this from what your audience is going to respond to in a positive way in terms of your making an argument. So, here's an example of what not to do when you're faced with this kind of writing task. Quote, "I am suffering from a skin condition which started during an especially stressful project at work. I am currently on medical leave because of this condition. My primary care physician prescribed a corticosteroid, but it didn't work. I recently got in to see a dermatologist, and she prescribed a UV light treatment. I submitted a claim for this treatment, but it was rejected as medically unnecessary. I am requesting an expedited review of the decision." All right, what are the drawbacks here? Where does this writing sample fall a little bit short? Well, first, while the writer does provide specific details, they end up describing a personal medical history rather than the main problem at hand. And remember, you have to try and separate out what is most important to you or most pressing to you when you're writing, and what's going to be the most effective thing in terms of making your argument persuasive. So here, the main focus should be conveying to the health insurance company the need for coverage of a particular procedure. A few personal or medical details are useful in this situation, but too many distract from the writer's main goal. And also, what's happening here is that while the writer does try to explain that the skin condition is a significant problem and that its cause may have something to do with stress, we don't really come away with a clear idea of what's ultimately at stake in this particular instance. If this were the opening in a research paper on skin conditions, the reference to stress might be useful in establishing the argument's importance. But that's not the case here. The fact that the skin condition came about as a result of a stressful period in the writer's life isn't that important. What's important is that there is a condition and it needs to be treated. So let's try rewriting these first few lines, and I'll ask you to expand on this in the exercises at the end of today's lecture. You'll be doing something very similar. So here's a different version of this same letter. Quote, I'm writing to appeal your denial of coverage of a UV light treatment for a diagnosed skin condition. This treatment was prescribed by my dermatologist. Your denial states that the procedure is medically unnecessary. I am requesting an expedited review of this case as I am currently on medical leave from my job due to the above-mentioned skin condition and will be unable to return to work until I receive treatment. So this version's a little better. What's better about it? Well, first off, it provides fewer personal/medical details, but the ones that are included are specifically relevant to the problem of the denial of coverage. They don't distract at all from the primary purpose of the letter, and in fact, they help make the argument, they make the case a little more clear, a little more important in terms of the eyes of the insurance company. They're going to see that this is a pressing matter. So we receive a clear sense, too, of what's at stake. The writer is not going to be able to return to work until this treatment is received. And thus, you've got more persuasive evidence here for an expedited review of the case. This is why it has to be an expedited review. I've got to get back to my job. So it has to happen soon. In a case like this and several other situations, the opening can make or break you. The person at the insurance company who is reading this does not have time to sort through details of your very stressful year. This may be really pertinent in your mind, but trust me, it is not at all important in the mind of the person on the other end who is reading your letter. Likewise, I've heard from any number of magazine editors that they often can tell if an article is going to be worth considering after reading just the first paragraph. You want your reader to keep going, not toss your piece aside. In other words, don't start out bland and vague and save the firepower for several paragraphs later. You've got to persuade your reader early on that at the very least, it's worth it to keep reading. Okay, so let's turn to another example of how to balance description and explanation in the opening of an argument. This time, we're going to take a look at Thoreau's civil disobedience. And here's one of the most famous passages from this text. Quote, I heartily accept the motto, that government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which also I believe. That government is best which governs not at all, and when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. Now, you can see in Thoreau's lines here a combination of description and explanation that adds up to a very specific and substantive argument about the role of government. In this case, what he's doing is making an argument against government's role in bringing about the war between Mexico and the United States, which lasted from 1846 to 1848. And this war also resulted in Mexico giving up a third of its territory, including most of what is now the southwest of the U.S. and California. There's absolutely no mistaking what Thoreau's topic is and what view he, and by extension we, in his opinion, should have of it. Whatever happens next in this essay, and we're going to look at some of that, what happens next in the following 3 lectures, Thoreau has already established a foundation for a successful argument, and he's done this by describing a specific issue and making a substantive claim about it. We might not agree with his claim, but the clarity of his position probably makes us interested enough to continue reading. In other words, we're not going to be inclined to just throw the piece away and say, oh, I don't want to read this. There's enough here that's interesting, engaging, that we're going to want to continue on. Again, you've probably noticed I'm emphasizing the terms specific and substantive several times in this lecture. An introduction really needs both qualities in order to be successful. It has to be specific enough that we aren't left wondering what the scope of the argument will be. A good rule of thumb is, if it takes more than 1 or 2 paragraphs to establish the subject and the range or the scope of your argument, you can be pretty sure that your introduction needs some revision. Additionally, the opening has to offer enough substance, some indication of what's at stake for the audience, so that we won't be forced to ask ourselves why we should care about it. We may not have a complete sense of the claim's substance, and you want to save something, admittedly, for as your argument unfolds. And so more of the substance is going to come later. But the introduction shouldn't leave us wondering why the writer bothered picking up a pen in the first place or putting his or her fingers on a keyboard. We need at least some idea of why we should care. We need a hint that's going to keep us going and continue reading. To better illustrate what I mean when I talk about specificity and substance, let's look at some negative examples. And these would be ineffective openings that, unlike Thoreau's, suffer from excessive or really general descriptions of their topics, and they fail to provide a clear, substantive explanation as to why these topics matter. Like, so what? Why should we care? Here's one of these negative examples. Human beings traditionally have relied on government to defend against outside enemies and protect individual rights. In recent years, people also have wanted government to provide them with economic support and financial security. The extent to which a government should address the economic advancement and financial security of its citizens can be a divisive issue. Okay, so what's your initial reaction to this opening? Do you want to keep reading? There's nothing inherently wrong with the statements. We might very well read them and nod politely and say, why, yes, that's all true. But there's also nothing particularly moving or striking about these statements either. And they're certainly not effective as an opening to an argument. In other words, after we finish nodding politely and saying, yes, yes, that's all true, we might then go on to ask, but what's your point? Again, we're back to the so what question. Or if we really want to get specific about it, we can call this way of evaluating the effectiveness of an introduction the what, so what test. This means, as I suggested earlier, that a successful introduction should tell me what the argument is and then why I should care enough to continue reading, the so what. This example I just gave you offers a partial response to the what question. Okay, so we know the writer is trying to say something about the traditional and contemporary roles of government, but the statements are really general, and the actual goal and the context of the writer's argument are really unclear. What government or governments is the writer concerned with? Is there a problem with the more expansive nature of current government, or is it a good thing? You really can't tell from this passage alone. And if you want to get really picky, what does the writer mean by recent? In the last 6 months? In the last 20 years? Recent is a pretty open-ended adjective if we're talking about the whole sweep of human history. I'm a medievalist, so to me, recent could mean the last couple of centuries or more. So the fact that we're left with so many unanswered what, so what questions shows that what this introduction relies on too much is general description without offering a specific, substantial foundation for an argument. Let's look at a more effective version of this intro that answers both the what and the so what questions. And here it is. Quote, "Government in the U.S. has been most successful when it has limited itself to national defense and protection of individual freedoms. While the U.S. government also can do much to provide economic benefits for its citizens, any long-term attention it gives to the propagation and preservation of individual economic advancement ultimately undercuts its most important tasks, securing the country against outside enemies and guaranteeing the liberties of its citizens." All right, so what's better about this opening? Well, in this version, we receive both a more specific description of the context and the content of the argument, as well as a clearer indication of the writer's position. We know the specific historical setting, the United States, which by definition really can't cover more than a couple hundred years or so, and is also confined to a specific geographic location. Moreover, we're given at least some indication as to why we should care about this piece of writing. We may totally disagree with the author's perspective on the role of the U.S. government, but we can't dismiss the argument out of hand due to a lack of substance. It has substance. As we've seen, an effective introduction is one that uses a combination of description and explanation to make a clear, specific claim about a subject while also establishing the meaning or the significance of the argument. The timing and the placement of the claim is important as well. The sooner a writer articulates the claim, ideally within the first paragraph, although sometimes you can get away with moving that down into the second paragraph, so within the first two paragraphs, the sooner this is articulated, the more likely the writer is to catch and hold our attention over the course of the entire argument. Now, conversely, any delay or deferral of a main claim can significantly weaken the writer's chances of persuading us to continue reading along. No matter what it is that you're writing, if it's a short story, a magazine article, an essay for class, a letter to the editor, you want people to keep going past the first few sentences. If you didn't, why would you bother writing in the first place? Okay, so what do we take away from today's lecture? Well, we've seen how a good opening is both specific and substantive, and it needs to pass the what, so what test. In other words, we need to understand what the piece is about and why we should care. And I'm going to ask you to put this to the test in the exercises for today's lecture. And in the two exercises I've given you, I ask you to craft an imaginary or hypothetical claim to an insurance provider, and also to consider an email and how the what, so what test can work to make both those pieces of writing more effective. A good opening is a wonderful thing, but it's not the only element you'll need to craft an effective argument. Yes, you want to make your opening as effective and engaging as possible so that people will keep reading. What you don't want is to lose your reader's attention just a few paragraphs later. A written piece with a great opening and ho-hum support will come across in many cases as just plain lazy. Well, I hooked them with this great opening, a writer might think, and now I can just phone in the rest. Trust me, this will not engender goodwill on the part of your audience. As we'll see in the next 3 lectures, the strategies you use to organize, support, and conclude your argument are just as crucial in determining its overall success. Next time, we'll focus on the issue of organization.